So I'm very pleased to welcome Alan Mackenzie. The last time he appeared at the start of this program, many of you may have seen a presentation on the real world into the classroom. And in a sense, this evening's webinar follows up on that, focusing on project-based learning, which, as he said in his short video that went out as a foretaste of the webinar, is a great way of making projects not just an extra activity at the end of a unit of learning, but actually bringing it front and center as the core of learning. So during the webinar, I think the chat is disabled. So please just use the Q&A box, and I'll be looking for questions throughout the webinar, and Alan will deal with them at suitable moments as they come up, and there'll be time again at the end for any remaining questions. So, Alan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alan. Can I just check that the audio is okay?
Absolutely perfect.
Okay, marvelous. So yeah, as Alan just said, this is a kind of follow-up. I mentioned project-based learning in the webinar that I delivered earlier this year. And I didn't talk a lot about it then because we knew we were going to have a chance to look at it in detail now. And so here we are. But what is project-based learning? A lot of you might think, well, I do projects with my class. Once I've finished a unit, I get them to do a project. That's not project-based learning. That's project work as part of a class. And project-based learning is when you take that project and you use that to structure the learning process. So it's a teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills by working for an extended period of time to investigate and respond to a complex question, problem, or challenge. Now, it's often abbreviated to PBL, which confusingly also is it can be called problem-based learning. Now, problem-based learning is slightly different. That's posing an interesting problem to the learners, which they're tasked to answer. You can make up a project from a number of different problems together. A problem could be the beginning of a project, but problem-based approaches are generally shorter. They're generally to deal with a single subject or a single issue. Projects are much bigger, much more complex. The problem-based learning follows traditional, specific, prescribed steps, where project-based learning, each project has a different series of steps that you need to go through. And they can be variously ordered and named. They both have a product at the end of them, but the problem-based learning product might be smaller and simpler, not as elaborate as a project-based learning, because projects tend to take a number of class periods. So we're looking at projects that go over a number of days, a number of weeks. They could even last a whole school year. I've done projects with students that have lasted for a full academic year. And we'll talk about those later. The project-based learning, one of the important things about it is that it's based on real-world, fully authentic tasks and settings that you're maybe simulating in your language class, but giving the learners a real opportunity to grapple with real-world problems and tasks. Problem-based learning can often be case studies, deal with fictitious scenarios, or look at maybe philosophical issues and problems. So less of a connection to the real world, although they can be real world problems. Um, the main types of projects, as defined by the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, are reading writing projects. People read stuff and then they use that to write about it, um, whatever the topic is. Projects where you organize data or take information, do some kind of research into what you're doing, organize that, and make it into a product at the end. Investigations, so looking at a topic in a great deal of depth, which might not involve reading. It could involve listening and speaking, looking at YouTube videos, etc., or TV shows. Design projects where you're tasked with making something. Um, in the past, I've used things like designing a menu for a theme restaurant, for example, or designing a theme restaurant where you have to choose what your restaurant theme is going to be, what that menu is going to look like, what the uniforms are going to look like, what the interior decor is going to look like. Um, Teenagers love those kinds of creative projects. And problem solving and decision making projects where you've got an issue that you need to resolve in some way. Maybe different project teams are taking different views of that problem and coming up with a range of solutions to it. Argumentation projects are maybe projects that end in a debate of some kind, or that you try and resolve a problem through a debate process. But setting up a debate, often teachers treat debate very lightly, say, okay, you're for, you're against, go. A real debate needs a lot of preparation, a lot of research, a lot of language preparation to be able to make the arguments and deal with the content of the issues that they're arguing about. So that can be a long process. And for any debate, I would suggest a preparation period of at least 4 weeks before they actually go head to head and have the debate. Real world authentic projects are becoming a lot more popular. Community-based projects where students are going out into the community and doing things like environmental surveys or citizenship, global citizenship campaigns, where the learners are dealing with an issue to do with the community, a real world issue, and telling people about it in their community, finding out what people in their community think about it, doing something concrete to change the environment around them. Those are, of course, the most real types of projects, the ones where the students are actually dealing with a real community issue and engaging with it, bringing the community into the school and taking the school out into the community. Now, I'm not going to be talking about those kinds of projects particularly because I think that's a specialist area, but there are some British Council resources that you can use and look at later on the Teaching English website, but there's also a British Council project called Connecting Classrooms, which is worth having a look at the information on that because one of the main aims is increasing global citizenship of our students by getting them to engage in real world and cross-cultural projects. So there's plenty of resources out there to help you with that. The kind of products we're talking about, what do we mean by a product? Well, anything written is a product. A poster, a brochure, a pamphlet, essays, reports. It could be a journal that's kept as they go through the process of the project so that you can see how they resolve different issues as they went along. In their groups, and these usually are group projects. They could be pairs. It's better if there's more than one person because they need people to talk to as they're going through these projects. And research projects can be individual, and then you get the students to share information about those research projects as they go through the process. And I'll be explaining a project like that later on. Action plans are also a good idea. These might be, are most likely to be theoretical action plans. So if you're asking the students to come up with an idea for an event, for example, an event that promotes your city, for example, then they could come up with whatever event they liked. It might be based in a football stadium, it could be dealing with thousands of people, or it could be a TV show, or it could take various different forms, but they're unlikely to actually complete that plan. The project is to make the idea for the plan, to get them thinking creatively, to get them thinking critically, and to get them to use language in interesting and creative ways that are stimulating to the students. Similarly, you could have a spoken product, a presentation, a debate I mentioned already. There could be a lead up to a discussion, a video or an audio recording. I was once involved in a wonderful British Council project called BBC News Report in India, where we had Indian students creating video news reports of issues in their area and sharing them with British school kids. And that was a fantastic project that I would highly recommend replicating in other countries. You could also do audio recordings or podcasts or audio interviews or some kind of radio program that they edit together and play to each other. And then there's also a place there for drama through skits and plays. Uh, it could be a mock TV show, for example, a comedy show, or a detective story, or it really depends on what the aim of your project is. You can also, of course, have a combination of written and spoken products. In most of the classes that I've used projects in, we have the aim of the project is to do some kind of presentation, a group presentation, so that each individual within the group takes part in the presentation, but they all write up that presentation or write up their product as their own personal report. So you've got the group accountability, but you have an individual product in the form of a part of a presentation and the actual writing of the student, and each of those students' written reports needs to be completely different. They don't write one part of it and copy and paste it all together into one. It has to be written by the student themselves. And so you build in personal responsibility for the duties that they have to create these products. So you can have, depending on the project, you could end up with a variety of very interesting things. But let's talk about the main features behind how you organize these projects and how you deal with putting a project together. As I mentioned already, you need a public product, a product that can be shared with other students, with people inside and outside the classroom, with parents, perhaps, with other teachers. If it can be shared outside the classroom, it has a lot more importance to the students. The products that they're creating and the process of the project that they're going through needs to focus on the key knowledge, understanding, and success skills that the students are learning through the curriculum. The learning goals need to be directly connected to what the syllabus or the curriculum is telling you these students should be learning at this particular part in their educational cycle. The kind of content that they deal with should be content that they perhaps have already studied in their own language so that they're familiar with it when it comes to dealing with it in English. And integrating critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration and self-management, and highlighting collaboration and self-management is very important as we go along. Collaboration comes from naturally being a part of a project group. You define groups that work on their project for a series of lessons. They're doing the same different things, but with the same people over and over and over again. Self-management is being organized and having responsibility for doing your part to be a part of that team and making sure that they have the organizational skills, the study skills to be able to contribute well to that team. Each project has at its core a challenging problem or question that the students use, go out and research or communicate with other people or think through, talk through to find an answer to it. And it should be at an appropriate level of challenge for them. Teachers are very good at giving students problems that are too difficult for them to deal with, largely so that the teacher can tell them what the answer is. And that's not the purpose of project-based learning. Project-based learning is a way of getting students to go out and find the answers to these problems or work through the thinking process to enable them to answer the problems by themselves and tell you what the answers are. If you do the work for them, what's the point? Um, my animation's gone a little bit here. Each project should involve, as I was saying, a sustained inquiry. So that's not just not just doing it for one lesson or even just 2 lessons. You want it to be 3 or 4 or 5 lessons or a longer period of time where they ask questions, find resources, apply information, use the skills that they've been learning through their educational experience. And that the tasks that they're doing should be authentic tasks, using real world content, doing things that you would find in the real world, according to quality standards that you have set, and having a real impact. There should also be a direct connection with the student's personal concerns, interests, and issues. Because one of the main positives about project work is that students get a choice over the kinds of things that they want to do to deal with the problem that they're solving or the issue that they're dealing with. They need voice and choice. And that includes not only what they're talking about and what answers they're coming up with, but how they're going to go about dealing with the work necessary to complete the project tasks and produce what they're going to create. Create, of course, if you remember from Bloom's taxonomy, is the highest level of thinking skills. So we really are dealing with very high level thinking skills required to carry out projects. One of the, I think I should mention that it doesn't have to be the only thing that you're doing on a course, but using the project stages to structure the learning process and inform what kinds of learning the students need to do to be able to achieve the different stages on the project is how project-based learning works. And again, we'll go into detail on that later on. Projects also involve critiquing each other and revising work. Peer feedback is built into the project cycle. One group, two different groups might be dealing with different aspects of the topic or different topics that are connected in some way, shape, or form. Along the process, they can be giving each other feedback on what is interesting or useful, what could be improved, how they could improve the quality of their products and processes. I'm seeing a few hands going up, but I'm going to get to the end of this section first and then see if there are any questions as we move along. An integral part of that critique and revision is also reflecting on your own performance, reflecting on what you're doing, how you're doing it, how well you're working together with your other team members, and how you could improve on doing that. And so all of this aims to help build learner autonomy and help learners to become more independent of teachers, although with teacher guidance and with teacher input. Alan, were there any questions? I'm seeing a lot of hands up, and I'm just wondering if there's anything going on.
One or two that I think will come up inevitably as we go on, but might be worth bearing in mind. Several questions about appropriate projects to do at different levels. So middle school has been mentioned, elementary learners and low achievers. So there's something in common there about at what stage it's appropriate to implement project work.
Yeah.
Shall I go on and plant a few more questions?
That's fine. No, that's good for starters. I think it's best to answer some of these as we go along, and then I can feed in some answers later on as we're
Okay.
looking at other projects. Because I think when people think about project-based learning, they automatically think, well, the students have to be able to communicate, so they need to be at least B1, B2 to be able to do project-based learning. But that's not necessarily the case. The point is that the communication within a team during a research project, for example, could be done in their first language. The important thing is that the product is in English and that there are stages where they're producing English as part of the process. But ideally, yes, it's you want them to do the work of the project in groups by talking to each other in English. And so you are talking about B1, B2 to be able to do those kinds of things. But if you think about a project for uh, younger learners, for example. Animals is always a favorite topic for learners. So, getting the learners to go out and find out the names of their favorite animals in English and coming back to the class and teaching the other students in their class about those animals, then choosing one of them and getting them to go to research that animal in a bit more depth. And so, in 1 week, you're finding out about the habitat of that animal. Where do they live? What do they like to eat? What kind of what are the different types of that particular animal? You can build up the content around that theme or take the vocabulary as a starter to then build up to the daily habits of that animal, where you can find them, all those kinds of things. It's about thinking about what the learners can do at that level and what the learning outcome the desired learning outcomes are at that level. Low achievers was another group that was mentioned. Well, the wonderful thing about project work is that if you give the students the choice of the topic, particularly the exact topic, the exact thing that they're going to do, in that project, then that can stimulate low achievers to motivate them to take more of an interest in what's going on. The, the kinds of tasks that you ask the students to do have to be relevant to the individuals and relevant to the culture, the level of the students, and their interests, their background interests. So all of that has to be taken into account. You can't just copy and paste a project from a British Council website, go into class and say, here, we're doing that, and expect it to work. You have to have a careful consideration of what is going on in the minds of your learners and whether they will be interested in it. I've got a few project examples here of ones that I particularly like. In most of my teaching was done in Japan, and I've done projects in India and Pakistan. So if I do talk about Japan and Japanese learners, then I'm sorry, that's where most of my teaching took place. But I do know that these do work in Middle Eastern countries. I visited a school for gifted children in Kuwait that was doing some wonderful work on project work. And yeah, these kinds of projects have worked in lots of different countries. So the school newspaper. is a really interesting one. I ran this as a club activity, actually, where it was a way of getting students to use English outside of class. Um, but it was basically a content-based project that the students took on. We got the interested students volunteered. They came to the class. They came to the meeting. We had about 10 students. We became familiar with what a newspaper was. We looked at examples of English language newspapers, looked at the different sections, the different types of articles, and then they brainstormed a list of ideas for what kind of articles they thought their fellow students would be interested in. Then they chose to write one of these articles, went off, did some research, wrote an article, brought it back. We shared them together. We did peer feedback. They edited each other's articles. We gave suggestions for change, and then we selected all the ones we wanted to have in one edition. Two of the students were particularly interested in layout, and so they went and found a free desktop publishing program that they could use to put the articles into. We talked about the design and what it should look like, what the title of the newspaper was going to be. It was called Voices, which I thought was a lovely title. We ended up with an 8-page publication, which when the school board saw the quality of the work that the students were doing, they had things like a profile of a teacher, an interview with my favorite teacher. They had an article about school uniforms and the changes that were coming there. There were articles about their favorite pop stars. There was a recipe corner, that kind of thing. They decided what the content was going to be. I supervised it. They put it all together. When the school board saw what we'd come up with, they said, you can print 500 copies of those and distribute them around the school. So we did that. And then that generated more interest and more volunteers coming to take part in the club. And we ended up making, I think, 8 different editions of the newspaper over a 3-year period. So that was great fun and a very useful one. That could be done as a class project. It could be done as a club project. This second one, writing a research paper. This was for second year university students. They weren't English majors, they were majors of other subjects, but they were tasked with writing a research paper in English. And so we took the whole school year to produce this research paper at the end of that 2-year period. I'm going to go through that in a little bit more detail later on, so I won't talk through that one. But that was a highly structured project. Dragon's Den is another one. I've got a link later on that calls it the business product development simulation. Dragon's Den is a TV show in the UK where business people go on television in front of a panel of investors and tell them about the product that they want the investors to invest in. The investors then ask them lots of difficult questions and decide whether they're going to invest in that or not, or compete between them to become the investor. In this simulation, I usually set this up. Sorry, I'm using the word simulation, which it's a type of project. It's a particular real world, a way of simulating real world scenarios in the classroom. You set up the scenario that the class is the board of directors of a company, and they are all split into project teams. Each team has to come up with a new product. I've often used a product for summer or a product for the Christmas market. You get different results depending on what the product is for. It could be anything though, and you don't have to particularly clearly define it. You can leave that decision up to the students if you like. The important thing is that they decide on what they're going to make, then how they're going to make it, they then take that idea out into the real world and ask people, if we're going to make this thing, What do you think about it? Would you buy it? And how much would you pay for it? Then they take all that market research information back into the classroom. We create a presentation and they present it to the rest of the class. The rest of the class vote on which one they think should be taken to market. That whole process can take about 10 lessons. So again, it's longer term, it's a sustained inquiry, and there are different points at which you input language, they get to use it in different ways. You have regular meetings. They have regular project meetings all the way along where they have to keep an agenda, write an agenda, keep meeting notes, and decide what is going to happen over the next week. So organize themselves and then report back in the following meeting about what they did and how they did it. So you've got built-in accountability for every team member. I said, I think I said, I have written up, it's quite an old article in a JALT journal, and there's a link to it later on in the presentation. It will be part of the resources that you get. Another popular thing that I like to do with students is to get them to teach the class a lesson about something that they're interested in. One idea that goes well with that is when you're teaching music, if you've got a lesson about music, um, I hope that you're not doing Beatles songs with your students because those are really old and very boring. But and students these days are not interested in that kind of music. So getting students to bring their favorite music into class and tell you why the music, what tell the rest of the students why they like it, what's the song about, and what kind of music is it, what's the genre of it, and where does it come from, and how, all of these different aspects of what they're doing. It could also be dealing with cross-cultural communication, cross-cultural aspects. Going out and finding out about a country or a city or a cultural event in another country that is that they're particularly interested in, and then bringing that in, helping them to study it, research it, prepare a presentation on it, and then eventually bring it into class and teach the class a lesson on it. So those four types of project have helped me as a teacher to think about how I can help develop the students' sense of choice and voice in the classroom, how I can help get them to get organized, help them to get organized and manage their own learning and deal with topics that I wouldn't necessarily bring into classroom myself. If I chose the content for these newspaper articles, research papers, or the products, or the teaching class a lesson, they would be very different from what the students are doing. I find that they bring in things that are the other students tend to be more interested in. They're more current. They have more appeal to the rest of the students. What the students need to understand is what the goal of the project is, what their role in the project is, what they have to do to be able to achieve the goals that are set by the project, who the audience for the project is, and that can be just the other class members in the room, or it could be a wider school audience or their parents. We have, while I was working for Nile, we ran projects where the host families that the students were staying with in Norwich all came to see their poster presentations on local businesses in Norwich, where they'd done some research and gone out and found out about them. That was a very interesting one. No, defining the situation, clearly specifying what the situation is for the project, and making sure that the criteria for the product or the performance are plain as well. So knowing that they're going to have to produce a 10-minute presentation or a 1,500 word research report, or a 3-minute video, or those kind of specifics about what the product is going to be and what the performance is going to be. And of course, what your assessment standards are. What does a good TV news report look like? What are you expecting them to come up with? What kinds of things need to happen in a debate? That has to be clear to them before they start out on the production process. Alan, have we got any more questions so far?
Yes, quite a lot.
That means I'm saying something reasonably interesting.
You just mentioned criteria, and there are questions about how to assess, how to evaluate, whether evaluation should be at different stages of the project or reserved for the assessment of the overall product. And I take it from what you've been saying that it really depends on how you define and describe the outcome, the intended outcome, and those are the criteria that you're judging it by. Would that be right?
That's right. Yeah, but there was a question about whether you evaluate during the process as well. And I think evaluating at different stages of the process is really important. Evaluation should not be a one-shot deal. It shouldn't be just one exam that you take and that's it. That's the rest of your life is marked by that exam. To take into account the learning process. I mean, people get sick, people have bad days, and if your exam falls on a day when you're not feeling particularly well, or your dog just died, or whatever, something's happening in the background and that's affecting your performance, then it's not fair to have all of the emphasis placed on that one assessment point. So there should be assessment points throughout the project, and I think I've got something coming up on that soon. We talked, I mentioned the idea of the research report. By the end of the term, you're going to produce a research paper on a topic of your choice. Now, there were specifics for this particular group of students. We did tell them how many words, how many pages, and there needed to be a reference list and they had to have everything cited and all of that kind of thing. So it was a proper research report that they needed to produce. The first step to this, and each of the slides that I'm going to go through, was at least 2 weeks. At least 2 weeks of doing the thing that is on the slide. So students find a topic that interests them. This usually took about 2 or 3 weeks for them to settle on a topic that they really wanted to study and that was going to sustain them through the whole of the 1-year period that we were going to be studying this topic. They had to explain choices to the other students in the room and do some background reading on it. Now, again, remember, each slide is 2 or 3 weeks. The background reading involved thinking about what the aim of the project was, defining the topic and narrowing it down. So if they decided that they were going to look at animal rights, for example, they then had to narrow that down to, well, which particular aspect of animal rights are they going to look at? It was up to them to do that. They self-select what they're going to do. And they get to choose what the kinds of articles they're going to look at. They need to go onto the internet and go out and find the background information that they're going to base their research on. So they need to decide what length, what complexity of articles are going to be appropriate for them. If there was no point in an A2 level student looking at The Economist magazine, for example, because it's too difficult. They needed to look at easier, shorter, easily digestible pieces of text that they could use. They were encouraged to use as many different sources as they could, and we talked about where to find information, what is a good source, what kinds of websites they could be looking at to find the information that they needed. And they knew through doing this that they were eventually going to build this up into a literature review, but not at the beginning. We didn't start by writing a literature review. You start by getting them used to the habit of reading and taking notes and writing down where they found different pieces of information. This took us 6 weeks, 6 weeks of finding one article a week, reading them, taking notes, and reacting to it in writing. So they had a reading response journal that they kept over a 6 week period. Now, at the end of that you could evaluate that every week if you wanted. You could get to the end of the 6 weeks and look back on it and say, well, how has this student changed over that 6 week period? Has there been an increase in the length of what they're writing? Is there an increase in the quality of the responses to that writing? Whatever your criteria are for that project, you could be evaluating that as you go along. Every week when they found their article, they read it and responded to it in their reading response journal. Then they came into class and they shared those responses with each other, but not by giving them the journal article. We started with, they practiced presentation skills. We started with reading the article and then reading silently, looking up and telling people about it, and then eventually working into turn the article over and tell students about it, tell the other students about it. To, at the end, don't even look at it, don't even bring it out of the bag, just tell us, what did you read and what did you think about it? And that gradual process of letting go of the piece of paper in front of them stopped them from reading it as a script and getting into the idea of what presenting your ideas to your classmates should look like. They get feedback all the way through this process from their peers, from the teacher. We focus on specific aspects of presentation skills each week so that they build up their different ways of doing things. And they're also have to write down the title and the author and the source, and so they're building up a reference list automatically. The role of the teacher in this period is to help them learn how to paraphrase, how to change and use their own words. And there are various different ways of doing that. We also, as I said, had them write reference lists and making sure they had the sources down, knowing what the difference between quoting and plagiarizing is. At this stage is really important. So when they're writing their article summaries, those summaries couldn't be copied from the article. They had to be paraphrased from the article and using their own words to create those summaries. And that was something that we got the students in their peer groups to check, to look at the summary and critique it. Say, well, is this a good summary or not? Why? Have they paraphrased well or not? How could they do it better? What suggestions did they have for each other to be able to make that better? Now, you might be thinking that these were quite high-level students. They weren't. Most of the students in the class were A2. So you can do some of these very complex things with lower-level learners. They were second-year university, but most of them were A2. Very few of them were B1. And quite a few A1s, actually. Which was as a different challenge. When the learners had completed that 6 weeks of finding one article, reading, responding to it, sharing with each other, writing down their sources, then they had to take all 6 of those articles and summarize them into one piece of writing. That was the literature review. Once they'd done that, they might come up with other questions that they wanted to ask and needed answering, where they would need to go and find other pieces of information to fill in the gaps. But the important point was that they were synthesizing those articles and creating a single piece of writing out of them. Once they'd done that, that helped them to come up with a research question. Yeah, that's not the end of the project. This is the beginning of the project. Once they'd done that, they came up with a research question. doing that, the teacher's role in this part of the lesson is to look at are the questions good questions? Are they useful questions? Are they Some of them were terribly obvious. It's like, well, if you ask, do you know the answer to that question already? If the answer is yes, then it's not a good research question. You need to come up with a question that you really want to know the answer to and don't have an answer for already. Then they needed to think about how they were going to answer that. And that was looking at different ways of researching things and what kinds of tools they would need to be able to answer their research questions. My preferred tool for students was a survey. So I got them to design surveys on the topics that they were interested in, come up with different kinds of questions that they could ask their peers. So that they could then carry out the research of asking 50 students the questions, collecting data on them, analysing it, reporting the results, and presenting those results to the class. So again, at each stage, when they created the survey, they piloted the survey in the class. Then they went out to their classmates and asked around the school, 50 students, for their answers. Then they brought the results of that into the classroom. They talked with their peers about it and built up a presentation of what their results were. Once they had those results and that presentation, they talked about they asked each other's questions about them to have a kind of discussion period that they could then use to feed into the results and discussion section of their research paper. The final presentation, they did presentations all the way along, and at the end they did a summary presentation of their whole research report. They wrote the actual report as a research report, and then we had a final grading point at that time for the final product that they produced. That was only a percentage of their grade. There were different percentages given to different points along the way where they had to produce the results, produce the questionnaire, produce the literature review, and each of those had a percentage built in to build the grade that they were going to get. And in that way, you've got a continuous assessment system that measures different aspects of their performance along the way and doesn't put all the pressure on the final presentation. Does that answer that question, Alan?
Yes, I think it does. See, there's there's another evaluation related question, which I suspect the answer is quite obvious, but let me ask anyway. How you allocate the evaluation criteria between the effectiveness of the way the project work has been conducted, the quality of the presentation, and the language content. How do you balance those factors?
How long's a piece of string? I mean, that really depends. It's you can't have a clear cut answer to that because it depends on the institutional aims, it depends on the learning outcomes. Really, you should be measuring the learning outcomes. That's what achievement of learning outcomes is the key thing. How well those outcomes are achieved. So it's quality of achievement of learning outcomes is what you want to focus on. I think there is this discussion about should there be marks for the process? Well, possibly, but it shouldn't be the main mark. It should be a contributing factor. You take it into account. Say it's like the effort mark. Oh, you tried really hard, but you still didn't get very far.
Mm.
Should you pass the course for effort? I don't think so. I think you need to pass the course for get good grades for good performance. So I think those kinds of discussions are general assessment discussions that
Yeah.
need to be had, and I think you need to have them whenever you're assessing any kind of product that contains content and language and a process that goes towards creating that.
And
I do. In most assessment systems, unfortunately, it is only the product and only the language side of it that is assessed. We aren't content teachers largely, and unless you're in a CLIL situation, where you're integrating content and language and maybe teaching science through English, for example, and the science mark is important, then the content is important, then that would be a situation when you'd have to figure out what the balance of content and language assessment is. But actually, from a hardcore language teaching perspective, we shouldn't be marking the content at all. In terms of grading, we should be marking the language that's used to express the content.
and a couple of questions about well, that come from the teacher's perspective. One kind of general one, if whether you have any tips for teachers making that shift from instruction-based teaching to inquiry-based learning. What would your advice be for the teacher contemplating that kind of change of approach?
Get organized and don't underestimate how complex it is. I mean, seriously, project-based learning. Well, there's this idea out there that when you get the learners to do all the work, then somehow the teacher has nothing to do. It is far from the truth. You need to, when you're starting off with project-based learning, understanding the project as a whole is really important. Knowing how you're going to organize the different stages of the product and what you're expecting the learners to do at each and every stage and what kind of problems they're going to have is really, really important. For that previous example that I just talked about, the main student concerns were, I've never done that before. I've never written anything that length before. This was supposed to be a 1,500 word project, which is the same length as some of my master's students are writing for their essays. That's a really complex, difficult thing to do. So the despair of some of the students at the beginning of the term was clear. And I had to reassure them that I'd be supporting them as we went along. We're going to do it bit by bit. It's going to be a long, slow process, and we're not just going to turn around in week 20 and say, right, start writing. It's going to be built up over a long period of time. Um, the students also would say things like, it's hard to write. Sometimes spend 10 minutes on one sentence. And so that's okay to do that at the beginning, but you're going to get better, and reassure them again that they're going to get better. It's going to get easier, and you're going to actually find it quite interesting because you're choosing the topic by yourself. And that's why you need to have a topic that is interesting to you and will sustain you for a long period. One of the main issues that students have is not knowing how to start sentences or paragraphs. And again, that's not an issue if you can provide sentence starters. And in CLIL methodology, sentence starters are a great help. Everybody these days knows what ChatGPT does. ChatGPT works because English is an incredibly, language is a very predictable thing. And when you start with once, the next word is likely to be upon, and the word after that is going to be and the word after that is going to be time. It's the once upon a time is a sentence starter. Then what happened? That's the content. That's the interesting part. Once upon a time is just a structuring mechanism. And most of the language that we get in the genres that we're asking our students to create are predictable. They have fixed sentence starters or a range of sentence starters that you can choose between and then continue. And once they get to know that, once they get to know that there's a pattern to these things, that the genre and the sentence starters are fairly fixed and predictable, and they can learn them and use them, it becomes a lot easier and faster to write. As people who are practiced writers know, it's often a question of just getting the boring sentence starter down, and then the rest follows from that. For teachers, teacher concerns on this kind of project was things like, what's the point of teaching how to write an academic essay if they can't write a sentence? Well, if you don't teach them how to do it, they're not going to be able to do it. And this is your opportunity to get them to create writing by themselves. How can you stop plagiarizing? Teach them how not to. There's a lot of teacher complaining about, oh, but my students just copy. It's like, well, recognize it, highlight it, and teach them how to do it differently. Find out what paraphrasing strategies there are, and there are many of them. There's word substitution. You can change the grammar structure. You can change all the vocabulary, mix it up, throw it about, massage it. There's lots of different ways that you can change the words that are used, but teaching students how to do that is really important. If they've never done this kind of thing before, that can be very useful. And then how to teach referencing skills. Well, referencing skills are really, really boring, and students don't like it. Teachers don't like it. But it has to be done, because if you're teaching English for academic purposes, if you're teaching English for future study, then they need to know that they have to cite the writers that they're reading. Giving effective feedback, and this is an issue in a project class. If you've got, say, 20 students and you've got them in groups of 4, that's 5 different groups who've got 5 different topics, they may be at different stages of the project at different times. That's why you need to have a clear project structure. That's why you need to know, what are you going to do each week? And within a lesson period, what's going to happen during that lesson period? You need to be on top of that and understand, okay, this is the kind of input I'll need to give at this point to be able to get the students to produce X at the end of that learning period. And then the kind of feedback that you give has to be based on the criteria you've given them already, because they need that in advance to be able to know whether they're producing a good product or not. And the most important feedback you can give them is the positive feedback on the things that they're doing well, questions about their rationale for doing different things, and suggestions for how to improve what they're doing. And those 3 basic ideas, you can help them to improve the quality of what they're doing. Are there any more questions there, Alan?
Yes, certainly. One participant has suggested that project work is a particular challenge for teachers, because there aren't any answers. There's no key that they can refer to. But allied to that was another question, which might make you think, what challenges have you what are some of the pitfalls and traps to watch out for?
Pitfalls and traps. I've completely forgotten the first question. What was the first one again?
Oh, it was suggesting that teachers found project work rather forbidding because there aren't any right answers.
But that's also what's exciting about it. All the answers are right in project work. Whatever the students say is right, as far as I'm concerned. And there may be things that they come up with that are a bit off the wall. That's all right. That's them having a bit of fun. The ideas that they tell you, and the fact that you get different answers all the time, is really, really interesting. A lot of them might be predictable. They might be, and if they are predictable, then you can bring that to the student's attention and say, that's kind of a normal answer to the question. Can we do anything more creative with that? Is there any other way we can look at this? And if you yourself have interesting or alternative ideas for them, then it's worth sharing them. Because I think the more we can get students to think more critically and more creatively about what they're doing, the better. I was just sharing I'll come back to pitfalls and things in a minute. Um, but the building in the language support for these projects, because I've talked a lot about the structure of what they're going to do and the content of the kinds of things that they're doing. But for that project that we just talked about, the way that class worked was that there would be at the beginning the reading response journal entries, and then once they'd shared that took about 15-20 minutes at the beginning of the class. Then we'd work on some of the skills in the box on the screen here, summarizing and paraphrasing, making a reference list, expressing opinions, um, and the presentation skills of read and look up and asking questions. The dark lines are speaking, the white lines are reading and writing. Then, when it came to writing the literature review, we'd work on connecting ideas, citing sources, paragraph construction, and then talking about each other's writing, giving suggestions. So we're dealing with multiple different can-dos here in different stages of the project as we go along. But you can see, if you look at the blue boxes, those are the can-dos. I can connect my ideas coherently. I can cite sources that I've read. I can produce a coherent paragraph. I can talk about my partner's writing. I can give my partner suggestions. So these are the can-dos in there, and the white boxes, which are the project structuring elements, are the ones that enable you to deal with those learning outcomes. The last one, this is only part of the project plan. Of course, there are stages before this and stages after. It's just to give you an example. In the survey design section, they're learning about different question types. There was a little bit of us talking about bias in questions. So if you write a question in a specific way, you're likely to get this answer. And there are ways of making your questions less biased. And then the oral practice of asking questions politely and then predicting possible answers. What do you think the question is? What do you think if you ask 50 students these survey questions, what kind of answers are you going to get? And what is your prediction? I got them to do that first of all, and then when they actually asked the questions and got their results, I got them to see where their prediction matched and where they didn't match, and why they think there was a match and when there was not a match. So, um, pitfalls and traps at different stages along this particular project on this line. In the reading response journal, just getting them started, getting them these low-level learners, A2 level learners, to go onto the internet and do a search in English to find something, getting them to select an article that was of an appropriate level for them, dealing with the content that they wanted to deal with. That was hard work. And it took a lot of encouragement for these very unconfident students. So when students are being asked to do something that they perceive as being way too difficult for them, trying to get them not to shut down and trying to build in as much support as possible to make it as doable as possible. And I think that's the main challenge, is breaking down the tasks to the point where the students find it doable and palatable. And it does mean that uh, you need to work hard to structure lessons in a way that shows them how to go about doing these things. Um, Building in time. Time is another one, making sure that you've got enough time to do what you're going to do. I mentioned at the beginning textbooks that have projects built into units at the end of them. I remember, I'm not going to mention names actually because that might not be very politic, but there are a number of textbooks that have a project at the end of a learning unit. So you've got a learning unit, it's 2 or 3 pages, and at the end it says project work. Those projects usually take about 15, 20 minutes. They're not projects. They're just ways of using the language that has been presented in that unit. If it takes 20 minutes to do the project, you're not doing it right. A project should be over an extended period of time, but giving enough time for the students to be able to do what they need to do. But also get them to realize that they don't have all the time in the world, and they don't have 10 weeks to do a 2-week job. So being demanding and balancing that demand for a decent product with the amount of time that they've got and their skill level, those are quite difficult things to juggle. And I'm afraid there are no easy answers to them. So in English language teaching, you need to carefully structure the projects. You need clear, concrete goals for the projects. Linguistic and skill support for the learners need to be there when they need it. It's teaching at the point of need. If you're asking them to do some complex thing, then they need to have the skills and the language to be able to do that. You need to help them to get there. Having models is a good idea. Once we'd done 1 year of the research paper project, I compiled the best papers together, put them into a book of 10 example papers, and then that was our textbook for the next year. The next year's students looked at the previous year's students and thought, "Wow, I'm going to do this by the end of the year," and they couldn't believe it. And it was a common feeling among the students that they were amazed that they had been able to produce something as good, high quality, and as extensive as they did. So having the appropriate models and enough appropriate models, and that goes for, it doesn't have to be previous student work. You can have real world examples that you can use as sample texts or as examples of how to go about doing the project. I used to collect pamphlets from places like historical historical sites in the UK, theme parks, shops, so that you have pamphlets that you can say, I want you to create something like this. And you can give them examples of the kinds of pamphlets you want them to create, or examples of websites that have examples of videos of news reports, for example, that you might want them to produce. They need to have the access to the language resources that they need to be able to do the job. That can be dictionaries, thesauruses, grammatical structures. You can't provide those. It's not a question of giving them those resources, but then being able to find them for themselves. And when you're developing a course that's based around a project, this is a useful process to go through. A couple of years ago, I was tasked by the Ministry of Education in Georgia to create a series of curriculum for the tourism courses, English for tourism in the vocational education system. And this is the process that I went through for that. That was 4 different sub-levels of B1 and B2. So there were 8 different courses with a variety of different hospitality and tourism themes associated with them. So that involved identifying the appropriate English can-do statements, adapting them for tourism specifically. It depends on your subject. It might be business or a specific subject like science or geography. arranging those can-do statements into a meaningful progression, defining what the assessment products are going to be for each of those can-do statements. So how am I going to assess the course? Then creating learning projects that lead up to the development of those products. So the assessment products are the same kind of products that I was talking about before. The learning projects are like, okay, if I want them to produce this product, then what kind of project would produce that? And then decide on the teaching steps that are going to help them to conduct that project and go produce the eventual assessment product. Then looking at the kinds of language resources, listenings, books, things like that, that you might want to use to help them to structure that learning process. So starting from the can-do statements, here's an example of one: can understand simple technical information, such as operating instructions for everyday equipment. That's a basic can-do statement. Now, what kind of assessment tasks might go with that can-do statement? Well, you could listen to a set of instructions and identify which points were said in which order. You have a list of statements and you have to put 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What order were they said in? And that would be a way of assessing whether you could understand the instructions. You might want to complete a checklist or a note table or a set of true-false questions or a set of multi-choice questions about the instructions. That would be a test for that. Or you could get the students to retell the instructions, and that would test whether they had understood them, internalized them, and were able to reproduce them. So there are a number of different assessment forms there that you could use. If you could actually have these on a continuum, you could have them as part of the learning process. That the top one, identify what was said, could be the first assessment point. Then later on, there might be, if they've done a few more examples, then the more complex checklist or note table or set of true-false questions might be a second assessment point, and a final assessment point for this would be retelling the instructions, which would be the more complex thing to do, the more complete thing to do. But then how do you help them to get to the point where they can do those things? Well, listening multiple times to short recorded discussion, sorry, that should be instructions, short recorded instructions to identify what the instructions are for, identify how many instructions and what were the main points of them, listen for any additional detail in the instruction. And that's listening 2 or 3 times to the same set of instructions for that information. Then practicing retelling and paraphrasing the instructions after they've listened to them, but doing this a few times, not just with one set, then expecting them to be perfect at the end of it, but doing it over and over again with different kinds of instructions for different things. There could be discussions about the quality of the instructions after each point. And this is making it a very task-based approach. It's having input, doing a task, reflecting on it, seeing how we could do it better, and then go and do the same task again with different content and see if you can improve what you're doing, improve the quality of what you're doing. Listening to classmates and telling them how to improve their instructions builds in the peer feedback to this process. And the kinds of topics you might use for this would be, it could be using basic equipment, it could be, it depends really on what your, what topic area you're dealing with. In the English for Tourism courses, we looked at making different dishes, so recipes for cooks and chefs. And then for higher level students in the B2 level, we looked at how to conduct certain procedures, checking in guests, greeting and seating in the restaurant, taking an order, checking out, giving instructions for doing that, and how to go about it. I think the important thing is to make sure that you're taking into account the specifics of the kind of language that they need to be able to do these things. So the there is a bank of language items at each CEFR level that have been compiled by the British Council and Equals. It's called the Core Inventory. You can get that from the British Council website. And so at each level, you can see what kind of language they need. And if you take a subset of that out for each stage of the project, and then use those for helping them to build the language and the skills they need to be able to achieve the learning outcomes they need to achieve, that is how you structure the language support into the structure of the project and to achieve the final learning outcomes. The important thing is that you look at multiple dimensions of the project and the course and realize that it's not just about the content, it's not just about the language, it's about all of it at the same time. And knowing that it's everything everywhere all at once and you're in the middle of it, you need to be in control as a teacher of all of that, knowing that all of these things are impacting on the learner and that they need to be aware of these things too, but helping them to structure that and guide them through the process of creating the products they're going to create to be able to achieve the aims of the project that you have defined. Have we got any more questions, Alan?
Yes, we have. Yeah, some there's a question about thinking skills and whether it's more effective to introduce the relevant thinking skills at the outset or deal with them as they come up in the course of the project process.
Okay, I think there's a lot of assumptions in that question. One is that you introduce thinking skills to students and you don't. Thinking skills are things that our brains do depending on what the task is we're being asked to complete. So if we're being asked to do a low-level thinking skills task, then we'll be using low-level thinking skills to complete it. What project work does is automatically build in higher level thinking skills tasks so that we have to use a range of different thinking skills to be able to complete the tasks that we're doing. So it's not like saying, okay, today we're going to work on remembering, or today we're going to work on analyzing. If you're treating thinking skills in that way, then that might not be an appropriate way to do it. I think all of the different levels of thinking skills can be used at all of the different levels of project work. You need to, as a teacher, be aware of moving from lower level to higher level thinking skills within a lesson and within the kinds of tasks that you're asking your learners to do at different points, at different times. But certainly being aware of the fact that you are using different levels of thinking skills is really important. So I'm just going to close the curtain.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes, inevitably these days, a couple of questions about the role of AI in project work, particularly in terms of originality, how to deal with the challenge of AI or the assistance of AI.
It's great. As a teacher, as a materials developer, I had to write some materials for a course a couple of months back, and they wanted specific vocabulary items included in a unit about a specific topic. And so I used ChatGPT and I said, use these vocabulary items in a conversation between three people about this topic. And it made one for me. That could have taken me hours and hours and hours of work, and the AI did it for me. I think teaching our students how to use ChatGPTs particularly. I don't know if you noticed in my presentation earlier on, I used a number of pictures. These ones,
Yes.
these are these are generated by Bing. I put in, for example, this one. I put in a Middle Eastern woman presenting a business idea to a company board, and that's the picture that it came up with. This is a group of students working on a student newspaper. This is a student writing a research paper. And this is a student, no, a teacher teaching the class a lesson when it came up with that one. So, I mean, for that's me citing my sources now. This is from, it's called DAL-E, which is the image generation software that is out there for use. It's extremely useful, as long as you cite it and you own up to using it for the purposes that you're using it. I have absolutely no objection to the use of AI. It's more of an institutional issue. Teachers are paranoid about students copying, plagiarizing, lifting things from the internet. But then that's been the case for many years already with what's out on the internet now. I actually did have a student who didn't come to class very much and then turned up on the last day with a perfect research paper. I took the first two lines of the research paper, put it into Google, and found the research paper, and it was copied off of a website somewhere. So I said, "Sorry, that's a fail." And she burst into tears and said, "Oh, but I wrote it." And I said, "Well, no, you didn't. It's on you copied it from the internet." But I thought we were supposed to research from the internet and use that as a source. And so I said, "Well, if you'd come to class, we would have talked about this, but you didn't. So sorry, you fail." It was upheld by the university and she wasn't allowed to pass the course. We do need to be on top of these kinds of things, but I don't think we need to be too draconian about it. And I think we need to accept that AI tools are going to become as commonplace and as normal as regular web pages are at the moment. We need to make sure that we are on top of it, that we know how these tools can be used. And I think we should actually be suggesting them to the students. You might want to have a look at. They're great for language learning as well. If you've got problems with starter literature reviews, if you want to know about a topic, something about a topic, if you've got a research question, put the research questions ChatGPT and see what it says. Maybe it can find you sources. Maybe it can find you articles. Ask it to find articles at an B1 level of English about a specific topic, and it will generate some sources for you. Using the AI to its best advantage, I think, is what we need to do, rather than fearing it or worrying about what our students are doing with it. I think that we need to teach our students how to use the AI to the best of our abilities.
And there's one more question, which I guess is related again to assessment, how to distinguish between the achievement of a group of learners and the individuals within that group.
Yeah, if I didn't mention this, I meant to. It's building that into having the assessed products having different kinds of assessed products. So a group presentation, for example, is a group presentation, and there would be different sections to that presentation, but every member of that group has to deliver part of the presentation for that section. So that's a way that you have time to watch the individual performance of the students, as well as take into account the overall product achievement. You can also, if the group is giving a presentation, I said you could get the individual students to write up their own version of the report for that project. Or if you don't want them to write an extensive report, there could be a reflection paper or something that they write about what their part in the project was and what they learned through doing the project. There are lots of different things you can do, but it is balancing the fact that the group has done a lot of work and the individual has contributed to that. You need to make it clear what the expectations are for individuals presenting or reporting. Any more, Alan? I think we're almost out of time, aren't we?
We are, yes. Can I just remind everyone that you have the opportunity to submit an assignment based on this or any of the other webinars in the series, in the program. And probably I think the easiest way for you to do that is to send it to me by email. I'll pass it on to Alan or one of the other presenters if it's for them. And I've just put my just put my email address in the chat.
I was hoping to get the opportunity to hear about some projects that you've all done in your contexts. I would be delighted if you were thinking of getting started in project-based learning, if you had an idea for a project and had a plan for how you were going to go about that project. I'd love to be able to give some feedback on those plans.
So that could be the content of an assignment for the program, a project plan,
Yes.
either one that you have conducted, an account of it, or a plan for one that you've designed. And
Yes.
sorry, apologies to the people with their hands up, but I think we have run out of time. If you've got any burning questions that haven't been answered, then please send them to me, and we'll try to get back to you. The video recording of the webinar will be available in a few days' time. Our colleague Amira Gomar has posted several times in the Q&A box the link to a feedback survey, and the deal is when you complete the survey, it then gives you a link to download the attendance certificate. And a couple of people have also asked about the slides from the presentation, which I think will be available together with the video recording. So if you've been at the webinar, or if colleagues registered for the webinar, the British Council will share a link to those resources. Alan, you also mentioned earlier in the webinar resources or a resource or some resources that you would be sharing. Here they are.
Yes,
Okay.
they're on screen at the moment.
Yeah.
I've got them on slides in the PowerPoint. So if you're distributing the PowerPoint, you'll get them. These are links to specific British Council articles on teaching English about project-based learning. There's also a link there to connecting classrooms. These are non-British Council links to videos about project-based learning. A lot of them are American because project-based learning has taken off quite significantly in the United States. Um, and some useful websites that have lots and lots of look at. One of them is look over 400 example projects. So there are lots and lots of different examples there for you to go and look at and hopefully take inspiration from.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan, for a fascinating presentation. I think if you walk into a project-based classroom, you might not see very much teaching going on, but this evening's webinar has demonstrated really well how much thinking and planning lies behind that. And I should mention, I think this particular webinar probably holds the record for the number of questions that we've received, which, as you said, I think is probably a very good sign. So many thanks to colleagues at the British Council for setting this up. Thank you all for attending. The next webinar in this series will be on Friday, the 15th of December. The presenter will be Mark Almond from Canterbury Christ Church University in the UK. And he'll be talking about social and emotional learning through drama in the English classroom. So hope to see many of you, if not all of you, there. And thanks again for attending this evening. Thank you.